All right, welcome to the Delhi podcast. Very special guest today, Nick Crocker, who is general partner at Blackbird VC in Australia. Nick, thanks for coming on.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And also, thanks for your mentorship and all the advice you've given me so far and introductions into the VC world. It's been awesome. But can you tell me a bit about your current role at Blackbird and what it looks like on the day to day?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually, before we get into that, as you said that, I was trying to think, well, when did we first meet? And I remember I read an article about you being interested in investing in the Australian Financial Review. And I literally sent you an email through your website. So one of the best emails through a website I've ever sent. Yeah, so Blackbird Ventures. So we are a venture capital fund. We're based in Australia. We have offices in Sydney, Melbourne, and Auckland. We exist to supercharge Australia and New Zealand's most ambitious founders. And the Blackbird was founded in 2011. And I was actually the second or third, I should actually find that out, but one of the first three founders that Blackbird ever invested in. And then the company that Blackbird invested in was called Sessions. It was a digital health coaching startup. We got acquired by MyFitnessPal in 2014. And so we became the first Blackbird company to ever be sold and then return capital. So it's been an interesting journey because I got to know the Blackbird team as a founder first and really got to experience what it was to be in that Blackbird community, and got to know Nikki and Rick and Samantha and Joel, who were the first four members of the team really, really well. And it was pretty cool to come home in 2017. Came home and to join the Blackbird team, and now to be a partner and be a big part of this sort of current wave of entrepreneurship in Australia makes me really proud, and I'm really proud of what the role Blackbird's played in it.
Yeah, it's really cool that it's kind of already come full circle for you. How did you first get into tech and startups?
Yeah, it was a very circuitous path. So I grew up in Queensland, like 45 minutes outside of Noosa in the hinterland. So there wasn't a lot of entrepreneurs where I grew up. I didn't really know what an entrepreneur was till I was in my early 20s. I had always I just didn't have really any exposure. But I think the first thing was we got the internet in, the early 90s, and to be sort of so remote, but to be able to connect to all the music in the world and just all the information in the world from my little dial-up modem in Queensland just sort of set my mind on fire. So that was when I was early on as a teenager. And so I fell in love with the internet and primarily with music. So I was the kid that I used to go to the library and I would rent out Rolling Stone magazines, like old copies, just to read the music reviews. So I was just obsessed with music from the youngest age. And then when I got the internet, it was like, oh, I can just find out about all this music, and there's so many communities and forums. So I sort of just fell in love with what the internet could be and what it could mean to someone like a kid like me. But I never really conceptualized that you could make the internet, you could build the internet until much later. So I studied law at university. I was a journalist all through university, and I had a column in the Sunday Mail, which is a paper in Queensland, where I would profile, it was called the Y Files. I was profiling like inspirational Generation Y people. So like poets, politicians, puppeteers, sculptors, artists, just anyone that seemed interesting. I would just write to them and try and write about them in the column. So I found out about these entrepreneurs, and I thought, oh, they seem interesting. I'll go and write a story about them. And it was one of those moments in life where you just sort of realize what you've been all along. I was I met these three guys who worked out of this old substation. And I was like, oh, like my whole life I've been one of these people, but not realized it. And so I think I was 24 or 25 at that point, and then very quickly joined a startup, and then started a startup, and then sold a startup. And then, yeah, that's sort of the last 10 years has just been this, or 15 years has just been this sort of super acceleration through being a startup founder, being an operator in a startup, and now almost full circle being a funder of startups.
Yeah, no, that's interesting how that column got you in and to meet your kind of people. That's interesting.
Yeah, so it was interesting because at the beginning of doing that column, it was sort of came from a place of a little bit of a lost place. And so I remember the sort of thesis for me doing the column or pitching the column was, I don't know what I want to be. So I'm going to go and meet people who know what they want to be and try and, in a way, I was trying on for size the job that they were doing and the way that they described it. And so like I remember meeting young politicians thinking like, oh, politics is an amazing place to have an impact. But just sort of remember being in this sort of local member's office, just thinking like, oh, this is way more grim than I thought. Or I remember meeting a jeweler who's sort of internationally recognized jeweler, and just thinking like, okay, there's like the level of creativity that this person has, the sort of intensity of her creative output, like that's not, I would love to be that. That's not me. So it's sort of like trying on for size all these different roles and different things that people did. And then when I met these entrepreneurs and they just had this spirit of like, I can do anything and I can do it now, I was like, oh, that's what I want to be a part of. And yeah, it's been, my whole life has oriented to that ever since.
No, that's really interesting. And I think that's probably good advice for young people if you don't know what to do, and try to get connected to people that know what they're doing and find out and try out some different things. And it kind of skips me to a question I was going to ask you later on, but I'm actually talking to my old high school, Maryborough, later tonight. And if I know there's not one path to get into technology and startups, but how could a young person today, growing up out in the country in a town like Maryborough, how could they get into the tech world or build the skills or connections to get involved?
Yeah, so it's shocking how many people will respond to you if you ask them the right question. And so I think there's sometimes a sense that, oh, I could never ask, that CEO or that founder or that person for some time or some advice. But actually, like, a well-meaning, genuine, thoughtful question gets a good response a shocking amount of the time. So one of the things that the internet does is it breaks down the barriers of, could a kid in Maryborough who's really interested in building go-karts leverage those skills up and go and join a team and start building rockets. And I use that example. We had a founder come and pitch us yesterday, and before his current startup, he was an engineer at a rocket company. But I asked him, like, where did the passion come from? He said, I'm just a kid who loves cars, and I grew up building go-karts. And actually, go-karts in some ways are more complex than rockets. So I've been in the garage with my dad since I was 5 years old. So by the time it came to being a rocket engineer, he built a lot of the skills. So I think sometimes partly it's perception, just that a kid from Maryborough couldn't send an email to you and ask you a question about how to become an investor or a professional athlete. Like I bet if they did, you would respond. So I think knowing that you can ask, but also the other answer is YouTube. Yeah. Like the answer to every question is either on Google or YouTube. And so there's just a staggering amount that you can learn by yourself. And, just because you're doing it, and I can say this because I grew up in the obscurity of rural Queensland, and maybe rural Victoria is the same, but there's no reason you can't just figure it out and become really great at what you do by yourself. And the internet enables that. Sort of one of the magical things that we've sort of forgotten about the internet is that it does unlock the capacity for anyone to do anything. I feel like every day I read a story about, a group of young women in Iran coming up with a more efficient COVID test, or even at Blackbird, we are big supporters of an organization called First Robotics, which gets kids passionate about robotics anywhere in Australia together and has them do a competition every year. It's,
Yep.
I think the internet makes the world more accessible, and so part of it is just giving people that permission and that knowledge. Like, you can go get this. You don't have to wait to be tapped on the shoulder. Just go for it. And I think that is one of the cool things about the world today, how connected and how much knowledge is out there and accessible.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. What are some of your experiences on the operating side that you now lean on or give advice on to founders that you're investing in?
Yeah. So as an investor, investors are either sort of one of three things. Either you were an operator and you come into investing with a really deep operating skill set. You are a founder and you come in with that really deep founder empathy, or you're an investor and you always were and always will be an investor. So on the operating side, it's difficult because my operating skill set is now 5 years old, and the world is just a really different place today than it was 5 years old, and what worked and what mattered and the tactics of 5 years ago are really not relevant. So the only sort of transferring operating skill sets are more like models of operating, or like strategies of operating. And to be honest, I was never an operator at any meaningful level. I never ran large teams inside a large organization. So on personally speaking, that isn't a skill set that I rely on. Mostly when I'm having operating conversations, I rely on my networks, where I can connect whoever's got the problem with someone I know who actually is an expert. On the founding side, the thing that being a founder really helps with as an investor is empathy. So there's a trap you can fall into as an investor, which is the same trap that I think surgeons fall into. Like, imagine you're a knee specialist and all you do all day, every day is just fix knees. Like, imagine how numb you would become to just like the brutal reality of fixing knees. But for the patient, it's like whether they can walk for the rest of their life. It's probably the most important moments of their lives. And the volume on the surgeon side can kind of numb you emotionally to what the patient is going through. And it's a little bit in the same in venture capital. Like, the volume of entrepreneurs you can see, it can definitely numb your empathy over time, where it's, like what the founder is working on is everything to them. And it might be the 15th startup that you'd seen that morning. So what being a founder really helps with is, when you're a founder, you have all these super intense emotional experiences of just how difficult and hard it is to be the founder of a company, really, of any size. And you never forget how that felt. And so for me, every entrepreneur that I meet, whether I think their idea is good, bad, whether I think they're working on something good, bad, I always look at them through the lens of just knowing what they've gone through. So one, make the decision to be a founder, and then two, build the emotional endurance and resilience to go through just how hard it is. And so I think that empathy, you can develop it however you want. And there's so many ways to develop founder empathy, but being a founder is probably the quickest and most intense way to understand what it feels like.
I think that's really interesting. I think that's something that I, can kind of relate to, going all in on a career and spending, my whole life, from when I was a little kid leading up to different moments, and how intense, the emotions are when you succeed or fail, have a big loss, get cut from a team, have to deal with injuries. And I think that's something that kind of helps me with that founder empathy you talk about, because I know what it's like to go all in on something and spend, you know, years of your life on something.
Yeah, and have people who are only briefly sort of involved dismiss it or say, yeah, that's not for me, or you know, that's a bad startup, I don't want to fund that. Like you know how personal that feels when whether it's media or experts kind of say what you're working on is not the right thing like that.
Yeah.
It's a big burden as an investor to treat founders with the sort of respect and admiration I think they deserve.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. One of the things that when we meet up, I'm always asking you about, and I've always been really impressed with, is your process for scheduling, tracking your time, and you have two young kids as well as the job you're doing. Like, what tools do you use, and can you tell us a bit about your process for that?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's sort of so the tactical shallow part of this is that I track every minute that I work. It's really simple. I just track it manually in a spreadsheet that has thousands and thousands of rows at this point. And what I use that for is just as a data input for deciding how I'm going to spend like an assessment of how did I spend my time last month, last week, you know, whatever it might be. And then using that as an input to figuring out how I want to change how I spend my time. Because it's a cliche, but it's true that the most valuable thing you have is time. You can lose money and win it back. You can't win back time. And so underpinning this sort of, pretty simple spreadsheet is this sort of really profound desire not to waste the time that I'm on Earth. And I was thinking about this over the weekend. When I was 19 years old, my dad died. And that's a pretty formative experience, just as you're becoming an adult, to lose your father. And I think part of what that experience taught me is there's no guarantee that you're here forever. And it made me want to really prioritize what mattered. And it made me know that whether it's my relationship with my wife, Julia, whether it's my time with my kids, there's a part of life which is that every day could be the last day you live. And so one of the frames of reference for my own life is if I died today, would I have any regrets about the time that I spent? And when I look through that lens, the most important thing in my life, and this is what's important for me, this is a personal decision, not a truth, not a universal truth, but the most important thing for me, because of who I am and the way I'm wired, is that I just want to have incredible high quality relationships with Jules and my family, and especially my two boys.
Yeah.
And so in a job like mine, which is sort of infinite, I could work 4,000 hours a week and still not be done with it. I have to be really clear about boundaries so that I can switch off and be really present for, that crazy time. Anyone who has kids will know that crazy time where it's like dinner, teeth, pajamas, story, bed. Like, I don't want to think of that as a chore or a distraction from work. I want to think of that as like my purpose in life. And I want to be present and energetic in those moments. And to do that, I have to be really disciplined about how I allocate my time. And to be disciplined about the allocation, I want to have really clear data on it. So it all sounds a bit intense for time tracking, which it is, but that's just who I am. And I find it really helpful. And it really just informs the way I live my life, the way I set goals, and the way I prioritize my energy. Because I think a huge part of who you are is where you put your time. And if you do a calendar audit of the last month, that is more indicative of what you value in life than whatever you say you value in life. Like, what you value in life is what you do and where you put your time. And so, yeah, I really care about it, and it's sort of a key input. And I've been doing it for so long now. It's like flossing my teeth. Like it's just something that it would feel weird not to do it.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting. I'm sure, yeah, a lot of people will hopefully start tracking their time a little bit and
It's interesting because
prioritize.
people's first question is always, how do like, what tool do you use? And they're always like, oh, a spreadsheet, that's boring. But it's like the input, it only takes sort of, I mean, I track the time it takes me to track my time, obviously. So I know for sure that it's like 2-3 minutes a day, but it's such a value. It gives me so much valuable data about whether I'm spending my time where I want to.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's really interesting. Can you tell me a bit more about Blackbird and some of the, I guess, big success stories that you guys have had there?
Yeah, Blackbird is an awesome story, and I didn't found Blackbird, so I was a founder of Blackbird, so I can kind of tell the story as an outsider for most of Blackbird's history until I joined. So Blackbird represents this moment in time where there were 10 or so exceptional Australian startups that were just winning on a global stage, and no exceptional venture capital firms who'd backed them. So the Atlassian round, before they went public, that wasn't an Australian investor that did that. That was Excel.
Yeah.
And that's sort of a tragedy in a way, because you would think that an Australian company should have had Australian investors that they could have gone to. So there's this great sort of moment in the late, in sort of 2008, 2009, where there's some great Australian startups and no great Australian venture capital firms. So Nikki and Rick basically founded the firm on this idea that Australians can be the best entrepreneurs in the world, and they deserve the best VCs, but that best VC can be Australian too. And so the first few years of the firm was really focused on Atlassian style businesses, subscription businesses, global customers, no sales team, product obsessed. And there was just such a purple patch from 2012 to 2014 of safety culture, Culture Amp, Canva, and so many others. I named those three because those three are all valued over $1 billion now. But we were able as a firm to be the first investor in all three of those companies, and to invest tens and hundreds of millions of dollars into each of those three companies through their lifetime, and to build really profound relationships with each of the founders of those companies. And so that's the first wave of Blackbird. And starting around 2015, 2014, I should say, we started to see that the best founders were coming to us with ideas that often involved what we called frontier technologies. So rockets, LiDARs, self-driving cars. And we almost evolved the firm to kind of support that kind of founder, which is a completely different business, completely different set of challenges. And that's really dominated our investing over the last 2 or 3 years. And then I would say in the last year, the two themes that we've become obsessed with, one is alternative protein. So this idea that 10, 15, 20 years from now, the world will not be eating meat from animals, it'll be eating meat alternatives. And so a quarter of our last fund was in alternative proteins.
Really?
And healthcare has become a really big area of interest for us, both direct-to-consumer healthcare and healthcare where artificial intelligence can meaningfully change patient outcomes. So I think that, the themes that you'll pick up on there is we're not just a SaaS investor or an investor in the best founders, whatever they're doing. And we're a full life of the company investor. So we don't just do seed or just do Series A. We try and build a relationship where at every round, ideally, if the founder and if the company is kind of deserving of it, we can step up and lead that round. And so we're almost a decade into the journey, and It's been amazing. I think Blackbird has really been the part of a huge movement of Australian entrepreneurship. And I think we will look back on this time really proudly, because so many of our smartest minds in terms of both Australia and New Zealand are turning their attention to building companies, and Blackbird's a huge part of that. Makes me really proud.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And it's really cool that you can be there kind of every step of the way at every round and really build those super long-term relationships with the founders. What are some of the strengths and I guess advantages that Australian founders have, just by, being Australian? I know on the basketball side, in the NBA, we're always regarded as good teammates, hard workers, play team basketball. Is there something similar that Australian founders are typically known as?
Yeah, I don't know Australians, particularly in the US, are generally well regarded. People always have stories about an Aussie they met that they loved. So there's a little bit of positivity there. I think what's maybe not so obvious is if you're in the US, there are some pretty well-trodden pathways to becoming a startup success story, which is you go to Stanford, you join a tech startup, and then you leave that tech startup and raise venture capital to run your own startup. So there's this sort of pedigreed founder class that is just so evident. And like when you hear VCs talking to other VCs about companies, they'll always say, oh, she was an engineer at Apple and then she did her own startup and she went to Stanford and did whatever. There's no Australian version of that. Like there's no university for startups. There's no, Atlassian is definitely emerging and as a place that you can go and kind of sort of build skills, but there's not like a really clear path. So Australian founders come from everywhere. So I think like in our own portfolio, I think about Adam Gilmore, who was a banker for 20 years and then started a rocket company. Or, even Melanie and Cliff at Canva, they started out printing yearbooks for schools, and from that blossomed Canva. And so I think what I love about Australian entrepreneurs is they always start out somewhere else. And so they build this sort of toughness and resilience, because there's no sort of smooth pathway that kind of just guides you into the opportunity. Like you really have to grit and fight to find the opportunity. And there's a humility, because no one is anointed or, there's not sort of this anointed founder class. It's just a group of kind of gritty underdogs who are deeply passionate about what they do. And that becomes a superpower over time in building a company. And I just love that. And I love the humility and the sort of humbleness of the founders that we all get to spend our lives with. And I don't think the world really realizes that, but that's to me the special strength of Australian founders.
Yeah, no, that's really cool to hear. And then I guess, is there anything Aussies in general need to improve on, or as a country of founders to keep competing on the world stage? Is there anything that when they go from growing the company in Australia, try to take it to the US or overseas? Just to draw another basketball parallel, like when I came over, I had to work on my foot speed and quicken up my handle because people are just more athletic over here. Is there a company or founder equivalent to trying to take it to the global stage?
Yeah, it's so obvious. There's a big part of Australian culture which is self-deprecating humor. Yeah. So in Australia, talking yourself down and sort of diminishing your skills a little bit in other people's eyes is sort of that's a good thing to do. Like we reward culturally, we're culturally it's a tongue twister. Yeah. Just we want our athletes, we want our heroes to be humble. when you try and translate that self-deprecating humor to the US, it just doesn't translate. And people think you genuinely are talking yourself down. And if you're talking yourself down, you mustn't be any good.
Yeah.
And so I saw a tweet, I think yesterday, from one of the partners at one of the other Australian firms. And he said, the same business in the hands of an American would be pitched twice as well for most Australian founders. So there's definitely there's that. You sort of got to step in and be the American dream when you're pitching to the US, and not. You don't need to be humble. You don't need to hold back. You don't need to be quiet about how ambitious you are. You need to just turn the volume on all of those up to 10 and just let it out. And that's really uncomfortable for Australian founders, I think, sometimes.
Yeah.
But you'll quickly learn because you'll just see how poorly self-deprecating humor lands with most US VCs, and you'll see how strong the competition is in terms of the story they're telling about their businesses. And the best founders will just find a way.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. And I guess this leads me into a quote that you put out in your newsletter or blog, which can be found at nickcrocker.substack.com. We'll put a link to that. But
thank you for the pump up.
Anytime. But this and you have a lot of great posts, but this quote that you put in there from Sam Altman kind of really stood out to me, and it, I guess, goes a little bit to what you're talking about there. But he says, a big secret is that you can bend the world to your will a surprising percentage of the time. Most people don't even try and just accept that things are the way that they are. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? Because when I read that, I was like, yeah, like that's right. Like you can do that. And I think it's always a good reminder.
Yeah, and that to me that idea originates in the Steve Jobs Stanford commencement speech, where he says everything around you was built by someone no smarter than you, and it's a really hard thing at first to wrap your head around, because I think growing up, I don't know if this is true everywhere, but you're trying to get this sense that other people build the things we use and that companies and products and whatever else. But then as you come onto this side of the table as an investor, you realize that just normal people build all the things that we live our lives on. And even these founders that have insane amounts of success, they are outliers in many ways, but they're definitely just they're not smarter, or they're not aliens. So they're just people too. And it's kind of liberating, or in a way, to realize just that you can do anything if you just decide that like you have the entitlement to go and do that. And I love that sense, and it's especially important, I think, for Australian founders, because we're an island a long way away from everything. Most people don't. When you tell people how long it takes to fly from Melbourne to San Francisco, like they just can't even fathom being on a plane for that long. But growing up in Australia, you're that far from everything. And so it's especially important and relevant to Australian founders that you can. And you can do anything you want, anywhere you want. And like I just think about your story sometimes, because like I know where you grew up in rural Victoria, and the idea that you would go from there as your starting point and then go and be an NBA championship winning point guard on, beating the most successful regular season team of all time. Like that's crazy, but also you did it, and like you're just here, and you're just a person, and that's like that should give hope to a lot of people.
Yeah, no, I think everyone always looks up to other people. I know I had my heroes growing up. obviously sporting wise, and any article or different thing I could read about them to try to learn something that I could, put into my own game or routine or nutrition or recovery. I always held on to that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know we're almost running out of time. So two last questions. Tell us about your most recent investment and why you're excited about it.
Yeah, there's a few, but I'll talk about just one. It's a company called Eucalyptus. Eucalyptus is a healthcare company, and their mission is to be the most trusted healthcare company. And they have launched 3 brands so far in the healthcare space: a men's health brand called Pilot, a women's health brand called Kin, and they're about to launch a skin brand called Software. And I grew up. I'm the son of a doctor. I'm married to a doctor. I ran a digital healthcare startup. So some way or another, from the day I was born, I've had healthcare and the power and impact that good healthcare can have sort of just always around me in some way. I founded a healthcare startup, which I think was a middling success, but never had anywhere near the impact that I hoped it would have. When I was at MyFitnessPal for 3 years after they acquired us, and I saw how you could use software to impact hundreds of millions of people around the world to live healthier, better lives. And so I think coming into the investing space, I've always been just waiting for the opportunity to unlock a founder to go and make a dent in healthcare. And so Tim, who's the CEO of Eucalyptus, he and I built a friendship over a couple of years, really talking not just about healthcare, but about consumer brands in general. And so when he came to me with the idea for this startup, I was just so excited to fund him and see what he and the team could go and build. We launched the men's health brand last year. We launched the women's health brand in January of this year. Eucalyptus, on a revenue basis, is the fastest growing company that we've ever funded, which is one measure of success. But the measure of success that really makes me like the most confident and the most proud in the company is the user reviews. And you can just see that the way that we are transforming the healthcare experience for people is real. I mean, we're not talking about 10 reviews that are doctored. We're talking about thousands of reviews that are just organically being shared. And I just know personally from my own life experiences that delivering great healthcare has such a profound impact. And if you do it, it's very hard to do it well, but if you do it well, people never forget it. And so companies just having a really amazing impact. Customers are in love with it. And I think Tim and the team are building a direct-to-consumer company in a completely different and unique way. And yeah, I just funded them for the 3rd time a couple of months ago. And I'm really excited to keep going on the journey with them.
Yeah, that's awesome. Tim is, I've had the chance to speak to him a couple of times as well, and he's just getting after it.
Yeah, that's how to describe it. Yeah.
Really cool to see. The last question I'll give to you is what do you love most about what you do? And I could tell, you could feel it when you were talking about Eucalyptus there, but what is it that you love most about what you do?
Yeah, it's just a privilege to be paid to spend time with the founders that I get to spend time with. If I told you that there was a job you could do where you were basically paid to learn from the smartest people in the world, and of course you help out, you provide capital, you provide support, but really I think I learn more from the founders that I work with than they learn from me. And to spend your life with people that are having a huge impact, doing their best work, just completely obsessed and just so all in on what they're trying to do is so energy giving. Like you wake up every morning excited to see what's in your inbox, what's in Slack. You just it's addictive to be around that energy and that passion and that obsession. And that's a huge privilege. Most people's jobs don't, I think, aren't as energy giving as that so often. So that I consider just an incredible privilege. And I just love it. I just get up every day. Every day I have so much to learn. This is such a big thing to learn. The problem of how do you build companies that solve huge problems is like you could spend a whole lifetime dedicating yourself to that and still be learning on the last day that you do it. And so the mix of being around really brilliant, wonderful people and the constant learning curve that you're on, you get to the next level of this business, then you realize that there's just 1,000 more in front of you, sort of an infinite level game, is so inspiring. And I honestly can't believe how fortunate I am sometimes to be able to do this job. And so I cherish every day that I get to do it.
Yeah. What an awesome answer to finish with, Nick. Appreciate your time and all your help. And I have to have you on again in the future to talk about some future investments.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Hey guys, if you like this video, be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel at Matthew Daly. And while you're there, check out the Daly podcast playlist for more episodes. Thanks for tuning in.